Hey, this is Rick Kaselj from exercisesforinjuries.com. I wanted to answer the question before I ended up getting it. And I had previously done a video on, what is the best exercise for the subscapularis muscle. And what I said was the push-up plus is the best exercise. Now, this has happened when I've worked with a couple of clients, is sometimes the push-up plus hurts. And what can you do other than the push-up plus? Before we end up abandoning the push-up plus, which ends up being a great exercise to target that ignored rotator cuff muscle, let's go with a couple tweaks that we can do for that push-up plus exercise to see if we can move it from a painful exercise into an effective exercise. So I'll have a link down below to the push-up plus video where I kind of go into detail more when it comes to the push-up plus. So if you're wondering what a push-up plus is, watch that video. And in this video, I'll just go with the tweaks that you can end up doing. So if we go from the knees or the toes, what I can end up doing is sometimes, I'll go at this angle, sometimes people do not like their hands in this position, so their hands flat. So what you can end up doing is going onto fists and doing the exercise, from the fists. Okay, so that sometimes just people end up being really tight in that forearm and biceps, and that ends up making the exercise more painful. Other things that I can do, so that ends up being option one, just going from open hands to a closed fist and doing the exercise. The next thing that I can end up doing is I can go from hands, I can end up going down to forearms. So I've got forearms, and now I'm just doing the plus, back to the start, plus, back to the start, plus, back to the start. So that ends up being option number two. Option number three is, ideally you want the hands underneath the shoulders. Now, for some people that might end up causing pain in the shoulders, what I can do is just move the hands out a little further. And that'll end up decreasing the stress on the shoulder. And then I can end up doing that plus movement. Okay, and then we end up going into option number four. So I can end up going from the floor, I can end up going to like a chair. And just going through the plus with the chair. If I pop up onto the toes, it ends up being a little bit more of a challenging exercise as opposed to from the knees. And then so options, that ends up being option number four. I can end up going from the mat onto a bench or a chair. And what that ends up doing is it shifts the stress from the upper traps, so upper trapezius muscle, and focuses it more in that subscapularis muscle, and ends up targeting a lot more when it comes to serratus anterior, which ends up being not a rotator cuff muscle, but one of the very important shoulder blade muscles. Now also, if another tweak that I can end up doing is if being on the floor is difficult, getting on off the floor, I can end up utilizing a wall and going through that plus exercise. So you just need to add a little bit of an angle, and then I can end up going through that plus movement. And then utilizing something like this, I'm able to have the pressure on my hands and able to keep the wrists in a straight position, which for some people ends up making the exercise easier, like less stress on the wrist and less stress on the shoulder. And then before I go, one comment that I wanted to kind of talk about is sometimes people end up doing push-up plus with their feet elevated. So we talked about having, if the upper body or arms are elevated and the feet are lower, it ends up, targeting serratus anterior and subscapularis better and putting less stress on the upper traps. So that's kind of a key thing to remember. So if you are ending up doing push-ups with the feet elevated, you're going to work subscapularis more, you're going to work serratus anterior more, but the negative is you end up working upper traps a lot more. And for most people, they tend to be overdeveloped and overactive, and those muscles being overdeveloped and active ends up affecting how that shoulder blade muscle ends up working properly. So we don't want to promote that upper trap muscle dominating things, because it ends up changing how our shoulder and shoulder blade end up working. So just kind of to demonstrate, like some people will end up having the feet up here and then they'll end up going through that plus movement. And you can give it a go, but what you'll end up feeling is upper traps end up dominating a lot more. Okay, so there you go. If you end up having pain when performing the push-up plus exercise, I went through a couple tweaks that you can do in order to move that exercise from a painful exercise to an effective exercise. So there you go. This is Rick Kaselj from exercisesforinjuries.com. Make sure to swing by exercisesforinjuries.com. Enter in your injury or pain. There's a good chance that I have an article, video, or an interview that'll help you overcome your injury or pain. Secondly, if you're watching this on YouTube, head up above, hit subscribe. What that'll do is every couple days you'll get a video like this where I end up talking about overcoming injury or pain. And lastly, head down below, hit like, and leave me a question or comment. So this is Rick Kaselj from exercisesforinjuries.com, saying take care and bye-bye.